I want to start really basic and just talk about how damage is calculated in this game. And I know there's been a million videos about this, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but basically you've got several buckets, right? You've got your crit, your vuln, your percent damage, plus damage, strength, attack speed. Attack speed can be considered a damage bucket if you're interested in DPS as a metric. It's not really damage, but it's that's splitting hairs. But anyways, so the idea is that you get a bunch of these little multipliers together, and even if you have a small value to start with, through a series of sequential calculations, that small number is multiplied by 1.3 times 1.5 times 1.7 times 3 times 4, whatever, and it winds up being a much bigger number than if the calculations were all done in one step, right? The way I like to think about this is it's similar to the way compounding interest works in a bank account, right? So such that each calculation, you're gaining interest to your principal, and then you're drawing interest on your interest. So you're really kind of double dipping, and these work very similarly to that, which is why these multipliers are so powerful, and why you really can't have a character that just doesn't have vuln or just doesn't have crit, or they're probably going to suck, because you need every multiplier you can get, right? Now, when we're talking about divisors, these are not dividers, they're divisors. You probably can't see armor here. Armor's at the bottom left because I'm here, but there you go. So we got armor, DR close, DR bleed, and DR fort, right, for barb, right? So there's also DR distant and stuff, right? But let's just consider these for the sake of these calculations and concepts, right? So again, this is the opposite process of this, right? So you do not want a bunch of divisors, like a bunch of little divisors. That is the opposite of what you want, right? Because instead of maximizing your reduction, then you're maximizing the diminishing returns you get on these stats. So it's very bad, and I'll show you why with a simple calculation. So let's pretend there's a mob here. We're in a dungeon, and a mob does 100,000 damage to us. In one scenario, we have 50% damage reduction from close, right? So in this situation, we'll take 50,000 damage from that mob after our reductions are calculated. But on the other hand, if we take 100,000 damage from mob and we've got 25% DR from close and 25% DR from fort, then we're taking 56,250, right? So because it's the calculation is being performed in two steps or two buckets, you're getting diminishing returns, and this is also true if from 2 to 3 buckets or 3 to 4 buckets. The more buckets you have, the greater the diminishing returns get. Okay, so that brings me to my first main premise, which is that gearing for defense is essentially the opposite of gearing for offense, right? Instead of wanting a bunch of really small buckets, you want to kind of push those stats into the same buckets and have a few big buckets rather than a bunch of small buckets, right? And it should be noted that there are diminishing returns within the buckets as well. So for example, if I put on this chest piece, I gain 18.9% damage reduction while fortified if I have no other gear on, right? I get the flat 18.9, that's what I get. But then if I put on this piece of gear, it doesn't add up directly, right? It doesn't go to, 36.3 or whatever. Instead, my damage reduction while fortified actually is at 33%, because it does it just like this, right? It'll take 100,000 times the reduction from the first stat, and then it gives you the stat, and then it performs a second calculation here, right? And so what I wind up with these two pieces is 33% DR while fortified, right? So you do get some diminishing returns within the bucket, but then you also get diminishing returns between buckets, right? So by pushing those stats into the same buckets and beefing up your buckets, you're still getting diminishing returns, but you're minimizing your diminishing returns, right? And therefore maximizing your damage reduction. So I think this is going to be a small increase in survivability for most people. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but I definitely noticed it in my testing, because this is the actual gear I'm wearing on my Barbarian right now, clearing tier 90 plus dungeons. You see, it's not that good. It's not the highest rolls, right? Not the highest item power. It's just a matter of putting your stats in the right buckets more so than getting the highest rolls. I think that's more important. So the general rule of thumb is to just do a few small buckets, and that's going to be better than many large buckets. It's not that simple though, because when I realized this, I thought, okay, I'm a barb and I get like 70% DR from my challenging shout or something, because I got rings on my neck and my chest. So I was like, okay, so I'm just gonna stack a ton of DR, since less buckets is better. You get DR on my pants, DR on my chest, DR on my neck, and get DR on my aspects, and just get all the general DR I can, and then I'll have my armor at 85%, and then I'll take like no damage, right? So I tried that, and I got my damage reduction up to 83.5% without sacrificing any armor. So that seemed really good to me. But I realized when I took off those 3 pieces of gear, like my mitigation went from like 83.5% to like 75 or 77 or something. So it's like at that point the diminishing returns within the bucket were like so large that it actually warranted creating a new bucket, which is why I switched to these because before I had something with like general damage reduction and without these 2 stats. But by doing this, by matching your pants and your chest, right, you can kind of create 2 more buckets without sacrificing your armor, right? So that's what I did, and then you still got the as a barb, you still got like your 70% bucket from challenging shout. So in my testing, I ran through some calculations, and this setup was a little bit better than the setup with the general DR. And if you're interested in those calculations, I'll be attaching all my calculations so that you can look at them. But I know most of you guys probably don't care about all the math, so I'm just going to keep it real basic for you. So too long didn't read on this, or too long didn't listen, is just going to be you want to try and match your stats, right? So if you get damage reduction from close and fortified on your chest, you want to get damage reduction while close and fortified on your legs. Not the biggest deal, but I think it could marginally improve the survivability of your character, so it's probably worth testing to see if it helps. Now this next one is a very big deal. This is probably the most important thing for increasing your survivability. Is right there, armor's king. That's pretty much the gist of it. There are several reasons as to why armor is so good. One is that it doesn't suffer the diminishing returns within its bucket, as far as I can tell. And for that matter, it doesn't suffer diminishing returns like between buckets either, because it's always calculated first, right? I know it's calculated first because the game tells us, unless it's lying to us. But if you go to your stat window, if you have a piece of all damage reduction gear, and you go to like where it's your buckets are, your vol and your crit, highlight the all damage reduction, and it'll say all damage reduction is applied after armor, right? So we know that armor is calculated first and all damage reduction is calculated second. We don't know what's calculated after that, whether it's fort or bleed, but I don't think it really matters. What's important is that we know armor is calculated first and no diminishing returns between buckets, and it seems to not have diminishing returns as you scale your armor, because like if you put on a piece of gear that has more armor, it'll go from 75% to 80% or 85% to 90%. Technically, armor caps out at 85%, even though the tooltip goes higher. Don't listen to your tooltip if it tells you have 100% armor against monsters your level. You only have 85% because that's the cap, but it's pretty reasonable to get your armor up to that level in most dungeons. I'm not sure how high you have to get your armor to have that 85% damage reduction in a tier 100 dungeon because it's very high. My guess is somewhere between 15 to 20,000, but I don't know exactly. So yeah, it doesn't suffer the diminishing returns, and it's easy to get it up to 85%. So that's the main deal. It also if you go from like 60% armor to 80% armor, right? Since it's calculated first, that's like a direct 2x increase to your survivability. Like you just double your effective health against physical damage when you do this, right? 1.5x from Ellie. So armor's just super powerful. This is absolutely the best way to make your character tankier. You want to scale your armor. And there's one last thing that I have for you guys, and it's that I think people are really sleeping on life. Okay, so let's just take a look here. You can roll life on 5 pieces, right? Helm, chest, pants, and rings. And on these 5, like without these 5 pieces, my barb has 13k HP. When I put these 5 pieces on, I have 19.5k HP, and that's literally a 50% increase in my health pool just from these pieces of gear. And you know, I don't even have life rolls on all of them. I don't even have a life roll on my chest, and the life rolls on my pants and one of my rings are like medium, like they're like halfway. So you could get 22k HP unbuffed pretty easy just by getting good life rolls on your gear. And when you consider that, you know, without this gear and without the gems, you're at 13k. It's just a massive survivability increase. It should be noted you can gem for reduction while fortified, but since that's like my third largest bucket after close and armor, remember it's gonna suffer like some diminishing returns, and then also like it's just not as impactful as my armor or my reduction from close, right? And my HP scales with those, so I think it's more impactful. Like it's better for my survivability to gem for the HP than for the damage reduction from fortified, right? And that's because of this, right? Like as you scale the values of like your DR stats, like as you're mitigating more damage through your armor and all damage reduction and stuff, like your health, each point of health is more valuable because each point of health can absorb more value, right? Like can absorb more damage, right? So the better your gear is and the better your defenses are, the more powerful life is. So I would never, like on my barb, skip life on like a helm or rings. I can understand the argument for doing it if you need a little bit of extra damage, but for me, you just get too much health, and the monsters in tier 100 dungeons just hit too hard. So I think you really need life on the helm and rings, but if you want to skip it on your chest and your pants for other DR stats, you can. Like for instance, if you look up here, right? So what I could do maybe, what I was considering doing is dropping this life and instead getting pants with DR to bleed, and then you also get a necklace with DR to bleed, right? And then you create like another like 33% bucket or something. And I don't know if that's better or not. And you're going to lose a stat on your amulet to do that. So it's kind of sad, but it is an option to make yourself to increase your DR a little bit. So that's something to consider. But yeah, I would, especially if you're trying to push high tier nightmare dungeons, and especially if you're a barb, get that life where you can on your helm and your rings, because you're not trading out any other survivability stats for this, right? Like for like the legs, right? Like I have to trade life for an extra reduction stat, right? But I can just drop a little bit of crit damage or vuln damage on my ring for 1,000 health, and like I've got like, you know, 450% crit, you know, so if I drop 30% crit for 1,000 life, I mean, for me that's very worth it. So you're just gonna have to decide if that's worth it for your class or not. But there you go. So that's pretty much all I had for you guys. Let me know what you guys think. If you like this content, throw me a like and a subscribe. I got like a bunch more videos I can make and more tips and tricks I could share with you guys. So just let me know in the comments if you'd like me to make any more videos on anything specific, or you know, if you have any tips for me or feedback. I'm pretty new to this, to making videos and stuff. So any feedback would be really appreciated. Thanks a lot, guys. Y'all take it easy. Good luck slaying demons.